right, we'll get started.
Okay.
So, when we were together last time, we left off with the story of the Buddha, his life story, and his remarkable enlightenment night. And contained within the enlightenment night, which is very interesting because you have this very dramatic story of, the world turning. Savior is achieving his enlightenment, and his enlightenment is this very odd set of philosophical ideas related to the teaching of karma. So the 12 nidanas, to be specific, and you would think that it would be something much more cosmic or mythological, but instead it's just a very simple understanding of the whole idea of what karma is. And in this simple understanding that the Buddha arrived at, he saw that all of suffering was because we got into situations which by necessity had to end in some form of death, which was always a cause of suffering. And that because we were always getting into situations like that, there was a reason, and that is because we were grasping at those situations, we were desiring those situations, we were inspired toward those situations by our sensations and feelings, and all the way back to the basic cause of all karma, which is ignorance, specifically of the unity of everything, which means that we see ourselves as things being apart from us. And since they're apart from us, we conceive of our relations with them, feelings towards them, positive or negative, and we either try to grasp at these things, or we try to avoid them, or in many cases, we don't even notice them, or we just ignore them. So that is the kind of thing that keeps propelling us into situations time and time again. And the interesting thing about this theory is that it works in a variety of scales. That is to say, it is a interesting theory of how humans are born into this world and what occurs to them during their life. For example, you could say out of the fumbling and stumbling in the dark of your parents, sort of a classic situation of ignorance, there was the karmic formation, which is the seed of your own birth. And that seed then took, from that karmic formation, you took consciousness as a karmic entity. You were born, so to speak. As a karmic entity, you, in your early childhood, learned what to call things and what things were. You learned name and form. And as you grew older, you started to have feelings towards names and forms. And particularly during adolescence, that whole aspect of feeling intensified and came into vividness. And then you began to have, you left the environment of the palace, your parents, where you're not in control of your life, to where you are in control of your life. And then you start having contact with the world. Then arise all sorts of karmic sensation situations. Your life as sort of a TV show begins, and in that whole process, there's we have these very kind of a whole panorama of cravings, large and small, that propel us through this life as we gather around us the things that we desire and avoid things that we don't desire. And that whole process just is pushing us forward, even into the next life, because of our basic thirst and lack and need is the animating force always moving us forward until we then take a new birth, and so forth. And that propels life after life in the classic sense of rebirth. Just as much as this chain of causal factors that the Buddha uncovered accounts for this life, it accounts for every situation in this life, because every situation begins with a sense of us and that which is outside of us. And that sets into place certain kinds of predispositions. We become conscious of situations. We scope out the situation. We get feeling about the situation. We get more in contact with it and out of the situation. Desires arise. We go towards one thing. We avoid going somewhere else, and that whole process then leads into further situations. So every situations are always generating each other repeatedly as well by this same principle. In fact, everything that's moving is moving under karmic fuel. The fuel of our desires and of our fear, our hopes and our fears, and all of that. So that was where we left it with the Buddha. And what he discovered, of course, was that you could break this chain. And by breaking the chain, you stop this whole process of becoming, of continually going round in circles, birth after birth, situation after situation, all based on the ignorance of seeing self and other separately. And his solution was to not grasp that we're already beginning with ignorance, and we've already put in a certain situation which we already have all the way up to having feelings about. And not only are our feelings all pretty automatic, but we're going to have naturally desires, things that we like, things that we don't like. That's just going to come up. But at the point where we automatically just grab for whatever we like and get away from what we don't like, that's the point where we have some actional potential, because we actually have to move ourselves physically. Pretty much, we have to get involved to make something happen. And that's where we can not get involved. We can not do something. And that is to be detached, to detach ourselves from the situations as they spiral on. And so the basic idea of Buddhism, in one word, has often been said to be, that word is said to be detachment, which is not quite the completeness of Buddhism, but is a good starting point. That the whole idea of the Buddha had was that if I don't get caught up in these circles of birth and death and everything that's in between, driven by ignorance, then I can achieve liberation, then I can be free of that whole causal cycle. And once you're free of the causal cycle, you're free of suffering, because suffering is a direct consequence of karma, of bad situations of birth and death and situations deteriorating. Suffering is the downside of temporality, impermanence. Because there's impermanence, there's suffering. So, because detachment is sort of the essential discovery of the Buddha, this often becomes the basis of meditation instruction that we give, particularly in Dzogchen and also in the Zen tradition, the Soto Zen tradition. So we say, rest in the natural state. That's sort of the basic Dzogchen meditation instruction. And that's basically stop. Just rest. Don't grab, don't grasp, just rest. Rest the mind. Don't use the mind to figure out how to get things. Just rest the mind. In the Zen Center in Battle Creek, they are instructed to meditate and watch what's moving. And of course, they're sitting very still. So the idea is you're not moving, but you're watching what's moving. Trungpa Rinpoche used to give the instruction that we should, as phenomenal experiences arise, we should touch and let go. And we're told not to pursue things. So all of those kinds of meditation instruction really are trying to get us to step back and not jump into situations as they unfold. That we don't have to, that we can have some space around the events and activities of our life. So that whole idea of space in Shinso Chen becomes very important into the whole method of how you're going to make that cut between feeling things, desiring things, and yet not necessarily acting on them, at least becoming aware of the possibilities of detachment. Now, obviously, many situations come up and they're quite wholesome, and there's no reason not to follow our natural inclinations. The Buddha is really talking about using karma in a more substantive way than the kind of consumer choices and work choices that we're used to. The Buddha is really interested in this whole idea of karma, not just as a way for liberation by making the cut, but also as a way to basically improve your relative karma as well. And he understands that people, because of their habitual patterns and the strength of those habitual patterns, are not able oftentimes to just, let things go. I mean, we'd love to we get angry at someone, we'd love to let it go, but it doesn't let itself go. It sticks around for a while. And similarly with other passions and inclinations and drives and all of that. So he gives us a way in which we can work with the relative situation in our life, and that becomes really the majority of his teaching. I mean, the essential idea is to detach yourself, but short of that, in lieu of that, or as you practice that, also you can work on the 8 streams of accumulating merit. And that's one of his, a very typical kind of teaching of the Buddhists, where he's going to tell you how you can make your life better. And the 8 streams of merit, I'll just read the passage. It's short. So this is from one of the sutras. There are, O monks, 8 streams of merit, streams of the wholesome nourishments of happiness that are heavenly, ripening in happiness, conducive to heaven, and that lead to whatever is wished for, loved and agreeable, to one's welfare and happiness. What are the 8? Here, monks, a noble disciple has gone for refuge to the Buddha. This is the first stream of merit, stream of wholesome nourishment and happiness that is heavenly, ripening happiness, conducive to heaven, and that leads to whatever is wished for, loved and agreeable, to one's welfare and happiness. Further, a noble disciple has gone for refuge to the Dharma. This is the second stream of merit that leads to whatever is wished for, loved and agreeable, to one's welfare and happiness. Further, a noble disciple has gone for refuge to the Sangha. This is the third stream of merit that leads to whatever is wished for, loved, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness. There are further, monks, these 5 gifts, pristine, of long standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, and never before adulterated, that are not being adulterated and that will never be adulterated. not despised by wise ascetics and Brahmins. What are these 5 gifts? Here, monk, a noble disciple gives up the destruction of life and abstains from it. By abstaining from the destruction of life, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. By giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the first of those great gifts and the 4th stream of merit. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up the taking of what is not given and abstains from it. By abstaining from what is not given, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear. This is the second of those great gifts and the 5th stream of merit. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up sexual misconduct and abstains from it. By abstaining from sexual misconduct, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear. This is the 3rd of those great gifts and the 6th stream of merit. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up false speech and abstains from it. By abstaining from false speech, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear. This is the 4th of those great gifts and the 7th stream of merit. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up wine, liquor, and intoxicants, the basis for negligence, and abstains from them. By abstaining from wines, liquors, and intoxicants, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the 5th of those great gifts and the 8th stream of merit. These monks are the 8 streams of merit, streams of the wholesome nourishment of happiness, which are heavenly, ripening to happiness, conducive to heaven, and which lead to whatever is wished for, loved and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness. So that is one of the sutras where the Buddha is proclaiming positive things that one can do to increase one's happiness and accomplish a good fortune for oneself. And those 3 things are to take refuge in the Buddha, take refuge in the Dharma, and take refuge in the Sangha, and to practice what are commonly known as the 5 precepts. Do not take life, do not take things that are not given, do not engage in sexual misconduct, do not engage in false speech, and do not become clouded by intoxicants. Now, the first one of these 8 streams of merit, the taking of refuge. So the reason taking refuge in the Buddha makes our life better is the Buddha becomes this ideal of the awakened person. So taking refuge in the Buddha, you're taking refuge in this aspiration of enlightenment, of being awake. And it is, in fact, also taking refuge in the natural state itself, because the natural state of awareness is Buddha's mind. And that is, in fact, the best refuge of all, is to be in the natural state, to be awakened with an empty mind, clear and alert. And the taking refuge in the Dharma is, in one sense, taking refuge in the teachings and what they're recommending, the instructions of your teacher, taking refuge in truth that's revealed to you through your practices, and also taking refuge in the way things are, the truth of things as they are, as observed with an awakened mind. And then the refuge in the Sangha is essentially, specifically the inspiration from other practitioners on the path, people who have gone before you, the fact that they're teachers, their lineages, these instructions have been maintained, all that's been very helpful. But in a deeper sense, it's also taking refuge in the Sangha means that you're committed to engaging the world, the whole relational field, in a positive way and learning from it and benefiting it in a companionable way. So those are all sources for happiness. Those are all sources for improving one's life in a relative way and making the greater detachment that is enlightenment possible. Then we have the 5 basic Buddhist precepts. These are people have in Zen. They have particular ceremonies where they take, various ordination ceremonies. They take on various precepts. When we did refuge, we sort of assumed that we were supposed to keep these 5 precepts. And then Kusum Lingpa's view was that every time you did a sadhana, you took refuge. So he had a very general sense that you didn't have to go through a particular ceremony to take refuge or to practice these precepts, that it was just sort of the basis of any Buddhist practice. And so basically, the moral foundation of Buddhism is, first of all, a very healthy respect for all life, certainly all human life, animal life. And I think now we would extend that to the natural world as a whole. One doesn't destroy natural plants, forests, streams, estuaries, all of that. One is a caretaker, not a gardener, not a exploiter. So that's there's a whole extensive view of the world embodied in this idea of not taking life, of being a friend of all life forms. And of course, in Tibet, they have the practice where you can specifically, like particular animals, to increase life, that you buy animals that are destined to be killed and you free them. So we were always buying fish and freeing them and other animals when we did ceremonies of that type. So each of the precepts, things that you're not supposed to do, like you're not supposed to take life, has a positive virtue associated with it. So if you're not taking life, you're not just not taking life and grumbling about it. You're actually pro-life. I mean, you're kind of in a very broad, complete sense. And similarly, you're not just not taking things that aren't given to you. You're actually being generous. You're giving to others. You're not feeling any kind of sense of lack or want that makes you feel that you need to take something. Rather, you feel a sense of abundance that you can share with other people. So each of these precepts, when you look at its positive side as well as its prohibitive side, you get a kind of a full sense of how wholesome living would develop, and how that wholesome living in the Buddhist view then contributes to our happiness, earthly happiness, and future heavenly happiness, and sets in a way the ground for deeper realizations such as this detachment or resting in the natural state. So sexual misconduct, of course, which is something you want to avoid. Sexual misconduct in the Buddha's time basically involved having relationships with people that would upset other people. So the person that you're having a relationship with is connected with somebody else in some way, like they're somebody's daughter, they're somebody's wife, they're somebody's girlfriend. They're not really free and available and consensual. So it's somewhat close to, that's mainly the focus of sexual misconduct. And in a way, the opposite of it, or the virtue that you would like to have everyone understand and practice, is really the idea of just proper etiquette in terms of relationships, respect and etiquette. And if etiquette, one of the principles of etiquette is that you're considerate of others and so forth. So people who are actually very treat each other with respect and etiquette, you would not have situations like that. So that's false speech. The opposite is to be someone who not only tells the truth, but and doesn't lie, but tries to get at the truth of situations. A lot of times people are covering things up. It's much more comfortable to have everything covered up, but there are reasons why sometimes you want to get at the truth of situations so that people aren't hurt or things can move forward in a positive way. And then the intoxicant one, that's the one that in the West we generally tossed out. We just decided we were going to do that one. But 4 out of 5 is pretty good. I wasn't too much helped by Trungpa Rinpoche, who is intoxicated almost all the time. However, he had developed a theory which works fairly well with the idea of intoxicants, is that he believed that it was possible to consciously drink. And of course, you could extend that to whatever it is that you're fond of. But if you're clear and you're conscious, that is really the main point on intoxicants. I think the concern that the Buddha had and the early Buddhists had was that people will get stupid when they get drunk, and they do stupid things. And so if they don't drink, they don't get stupid, they don't do stupid things. So there's and obviously that is something we all sooner or later learn to avoid. So there is that famous story that the Tibetans would always tell, that this is a student of one of the teachers, and he's been practicing quite a while, and it's now time for him to be tested to see how well he has done in terms of his yogic progression. So they offer him, he's under these restrictions, so they offer him, they say, well, you got to do one of these 3 things. You've got to sleep with this maiden, kill and eat this goat, or drink this jug of wine. And he thinks, well, I'm a celibate yogi. I can't sleep with the woman. I've taken a vow not to kill anything, so I can't do that. And I shouldn't be doing the intoxicants, but that seems to be the least of them. So he drinks the bottle of wine, kills and eats the goat, and sleeps with the girl. So that's why intoxicants are the worst. That's what the Tibetans say. But at any rate, you see the general thrust of what the Buddha is doing. He's playing with this idea of karma. So karma can either, we want to free ourselves from karmic situations, but at the same time, we can also be aware of how karma can move in either wholesome or unwholesome directions. There are another set of moral teachings which are called the 5 cardinal virtues. And interestingly enough, and he does many variations of this sort of moral teaching, but the 5 cardinal virtues are, first one is faith. Well, faith specifically means faith in the Buddha, faith in the Dharma, and faith in the Sangha. So that's the same as our 3 sources of merit. The second cardinal virtue is energy. Well, how does energy arise in our lives? According to the Buddha, it arises from abandoning the unwholesome and adopting the wholesome. So if we do wholesome things, we get energy. Unwholesome things depletes our energy. And then the next one is mindfulness. And and the last one is wisdom. And of course, wisdom in this case is knowing that truth of detachment, knowing how you can stop and not be part of the karmic chain. So he continues with this one simple idea and then just sort of deepens it as he goes along. So we could maybe stop here and discuss. If anyone has any questions.
I would think that the process of detachment is, I think it's complicated because it's almost like, how can you, it just doesn't make sense to be a part of life and not get engaged in it. It seems like a ticket to all sorts of imbalance and unhappiness.
Well, we're detaching in a specific kind of way. We're not detaching at all from experiencing the world, all the way up into having feelings, positive and negative, about the world. The point at which we detach is, or at least we want to bring awareness to, is how we move in respect to those feelings, how we act with respect to those feelings. And of course we do this in a way. I mean, are we acting out of an altruistic? Do we have of course, in the Mahayana, we just developed the very helpful idea of an altruistic attitude. So generally, if you have an altruistic attitude, your karmic motivations will be wholesome, and if they produce karma, they'll only produce good karma. So that's fine. And we just respond naturally to situations, and because we have an altruistic attitude, we respond wholesomely and so forth. Here, in the early Buddhism, it's being treated more neutrally, that in a sense we want to be not look at our own lives and where we're attached to things, and see, particularly where we're attached to unwholesome things, and seeing where we can detach from those kinds of things. So that's in a lot of ways why you get the early teachings phrased in the negative, So we're careless about life, so we should become aware about life and detach. Stop doing that. So that's a cut we can make. So there's a kind of a lot of it's just where you start bringing awareness to the different parts of your life and seeing what parts of your life are not helping and not contributing, and cutting those out. And so that there's like a knife of detachment there, where you're just getting away from the parts of the thing that are actually numbing you and making you less alive, and so you're actually going to end up being more connected through detachment rather than less connected. It's not an emotional detachment. You have your full emotional range. It's just how you choose to play with this, with the situations, and what your general, looking at your general attitude and motivation.
Do you think that's actually what he was saying, or do you think that's just sort of the current? That's our sort of Western take on it, for 21st century Western take on it.
Obviously, it's my interpretation of it, but as to the Buddha, his approach it was twofold, depending on whether you were a monk or a layperson. Now, if you're a monk, you're a renunciate, and you actually have quite a few more precepts than the 5 we just went through. And for you, the fact that you're a renunciate, you've already detached yourself from all sorts of situations. You don't have a family, you're not married, you're not in relationships. You're just, practicing with these other group of people who've also renounced everything. You don't have any possessions. You've given everything away. So, in that case, that's a pretty strong. I mean, that's detachment from all world. That's almost total worldly detachment. Except that every morning you have to go out and see the world, and you collect your food from that world, and you're talking to people, giving them dharma teachings and sorts of things like that. So you're just engaged in a different kind of way, but you're not engaged at all in the worldly sense. So for those people, the Buddha's going to teach a pretty strong version of detachment, including really emotional detachment. But for lay people, those people, that's where you get the virtuous living kind of instructions. So in a way, even though it is a Western version to talk about it in the way I did, in terms of how you deal with life situations, to lay people, he probably would have had to say the same thing, because in fact they are engaged in the world in such a way that they can't detach themselves from all sorts of karmic activity that's going on. And so in that situation, they're going to have a more kind of, his idea is that if you become virtuous, if you have this loving kindness, if you have altruistic attitude, then that will guide you in terms of how you purify your karmic stream. And then you can be reborn as a monk in the next life and become detached. Not as a woman, but as a monk. The Tibetans would often tell their Western students that the best that we could do is just to be reborn as a tulku, a Tibetan tulku. So yeah, you do have to, they have some cultural prejudices you have to, update.
You said there were kind of these two early in the talk. You were talking about two aspects to the teaching. There's the awakening aspect, and then there's the virtuous aspect, and the karma virtue on the one hand, and the awakening, and that the virtue became the majority of the teaching. So I'm always trying to figure out where the difference between the two are. Are they it's just a complete phase shift from one to the other? And why did he go? Why was virtue the majority? And then is Dzogchen kind of a flip on that, whereas it's the awakening that's the emphasis, and that the virtue would arise out of kind of a glimpse or a taste of awakening? Is that just a historical inevitability, or?
Well, we can teach Dzogchen because there's a foundation of Buddha, the basic Buddhism out there. Mm-hmm. People have heard the word enlightenment. People have heard about Zen. People have heard, about meditation. And, there's enough. And people, understand some of the, ideas of religion, basic ideas of virtue and different things like that. So I think there's a basis there so that you can actually talk about that. But then it really depends a lot on whether somebody has ever done meditation. If someone hasn't practiced meditation, talking about, the gap between thoughts, not going to make too much sense unless they're very naturally intuitive, or naturally aware of their mind and how it works. Generally, you have some experience in meditation. When you have some experience in meditation, then you see that, number one, you've got lots of thoughts in your head, and then after a while you realize that at first you realize rather quickly that quite a few of these thoughts aren't helping you at all. They're just extra baggage. And then you get to the point where you realize that quite a few of those thoughts are extra baggage, and you start to toss them off the train, or they disappear off the train, or however they go. So, yeah, meditation makes the understanding of Dzogchen possible, because you get some glimpse of what the natural state is, the state of an empty mind. It's not like Grand Central Station of thoughts and schemes and emotions and sensations and everything. Now, when the Buddha's talking, though, I mean, remember, he's the Buddha. He's the first one in this eon. So, people have no foundation. They just have. It's just, of course, you walk out on the streets of Kansas City, you don't have any foundation most of the time. You're in Albion, so you can't just start talking about the natural state. People, you can talk about something that they can relate to, like, how do you make how can you be happier in this life? So you got to start pretty basic. So that's why you end up starting with the idea that which is an extremely powerful idea, that you can actually change your life starting now by simply being wholesome, and you'll have more energy, and things will go better for you, and you'll gradually, life will get better and better until you become a heavenly being. That's pretty nice. Of course, this is not like a brand new idea. I mean, all religions have the similar idea that, wholesome living will do you well. But the Buddha does a very nice job. I mean, the basic ideas of he keeps it very, very short, at least for us lay people. I mean, this idea of respect for life, being generous, and giving rather than taking, being polite and respectful of everybody, staying clear, and being an honest person. I mean, those are a pretty good set of general life rules. And it's true that if you do live that way, that things generally go well.
Bruce, I'm here on the telephone. This is Douglas.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just have often wonder, these lists of, like the list of poisons and other similar things, I'd wonder why the issues of, like, fear, anxiety, dread, or obsessing over dangers, and closely related is having to do with self-worth or self-doubt and those types of anxieties. To me, these are things that really keep you from being awake at all, or from treating people well, and why wouldn't they be in the list too? It's like, I feel like maybe these lists came in a moralistic era, and now we're in a psychological era, and I just wonder if you think they actually fit. Should that, what I'm mentioning, be treated similarly, or is it in sort of a different category somehow?
That's Does the question lists about things of self-doubt and various sorts of issues of that type. We are in a much more psychological era. I don't think in the, you never get a sense in the ancient world that you could go into, you start having a conversation about, self-confidence or self-doubt or self-esteem. The Buddha does do a lot of talking about selflessness or non-self, and along with the teachings he gave here, he gives a whole set of teachings about what the self is, and the self. There is no self for the Buddha that can have self-doubt or self-esteem issues or any of that, self-confidence issues. Any kind of self issue is not possible because it's a fiction. That essentially what we are a bundle of thoughts, feelings, sensations, mental constructs. Just sort of this bundle that's sort of held together temporarily, and it's also it's also conscious, and including self-conscious, and by speaking to the morality, he's sort of trying to speak to our enlightened energy. There's sort of within all this bundle of personal characteristics, sensations, feelings, thoughts, and so forth. There's also a clarity and an energy, a pure energy and a pure awareness. And when the Buddha is talking about things like respect for life and generosity, he's actually talking about enlightened qualities of a Buddha. So he's speaking to our awareness or speaking to our enlightenment. So in some ways, I think it's actually quite profound. And the reason why he doesn't do the other thing, going to the psychological, is that a lot of the psychological, as we understand it, and even as Trungpa would phrase it, is really based a lot on modern conceptions of the self. And the Buddha doesn't have that kind of conception of the self. He only has an understanding of a Buddha nature, which is awareness, and then these kind of human mental constructs that form a bundle that's who we are in the moment.
So it's also like self-doubt, or would fall in the category of ignorance, because it's all based on the assumption that we have this fallible self.
Yeah, it's like, you come down and for breakfast in the morning and you're crying tears because your unicorn has a rare disease. I mean, what can you do with that? I mean, that's.
I think, though, apart from self-doubt, there's just fear in general. Like, I don't know, your daughter's going to have an operation. You're just totally obsessed with the fact that it's going to go badly. And you can live your life like that. A person like that has no chance ever to really be a positive, contributing person. And there's lots of people like that. And that's why I think fear also would be high on my list of obstacles. It's not quite the same as self-doubt, but it's sort of, they kind of run together. Anyway, yeah.
Well, fear is, you have to start breaking, all these things break down. So fear is, of course, it's an emotion. It's also, an emotion is connected with a bunch of thoughts. And as you meditate, you start to see these emotions sometimes, because if you meditate enough, you meditate sometimes when you're angry, and what that's like. And you see that it's both it's a feeling. It's your body even is like clenched. Has all these bodily sensations when you're afraid or whatever you're feeling, angry, and it's also a whole bunch of bad thoughts. What if this? What if this? What if this? and it's a whole complex. But the meditation over time, by introducing the idea of space between thoughts and not jumping on feelings and not pursuing thoughts and not sort of living off the kind of soap opera quality of events and thoughts about events, and it's particularly spinning thoughts about stuff. You get to where you can, in real life situations, act in a more detached way. So, in a sense, meditation is detachment practice. I mean, that's why everybody's meditating. He doesn't just tell people go out in the world and be detached. It also shows them how to meditate. And through meditation, by actually just sitting still, we detach ourselves from activity. We detach ourselves from moving, from doing something. We have to do nothing for an hour or more. So that whole practice is detachment training. And then that enables people in their lives to respond more creatively to situations because there's more space. The situations themselves take place in which you can be creative.
Well, I do think that obviously meditation helps with all these types of issues I mentioned. No doubt about that. It's more about why. And actually, Tsongkhapa Rinpoche does talk about. So, yeah, he talks about that quite a bit.
I mean, if they're inclined to meditation or Buddhism, then you can go that way. In the world that I live in, everybody is Christian. You know, I mean, it's just, most of America is this way. So you have to use a different language. So you, instead of telling them to meditate, you have to tell them to kind of, turn it over to God, or you don't worry about this. It's in God's hands. That kind of thing, just to get them to relax and not obsess about stuff.
Yeah.
Which works, which does work quite well if you're able to do that. If you really believe in God and you're able to say yes, give it to God. I'll let God take this, and it's very nice.
Well, I think it's nice it works, but are you saying that actually is kind of pretty healthy? Or I don't know. Maybe we're getting too far off track here, but I wonder myself, because I've had experiences like that, and I just thought, well, I just tricked myself. I didn't actually do anything.
No, I think it's healthy. I think it's basically. I mean, there are things beyond this, and in the Christian world, you call it God. In Buddhist world, we have lots of other different names. We also have Buddhas and lots of Buddhas, so you can let the Buddhas take care of it, or you can let God take care of it. It's, I mean, that's a huge understanding. That'll make anyone, as soon as someone gets that idea that you can let the Buddhas take over, you can let God take over, whatever. Boy, that just takes such a weight off your shoulders. I mean, off your life. I mean, you're not the person who's got to like save the world. There's lots of enlightened beings out there that, on this task. Now you might ask, well, if there's all these enlightened beings on this task, then why is the world in such a messed up shape? And that's because, well, maybe there's not quite enough enlightened beings to take care of everything. So that's why we have to become enlightened, so we can add to the future supply.
That's a non-self thing. Like you don't have to carry the world. Nothing's particularly hinging on your super heroic efforts.
Well, you can only take care of what's in front of you. And I'm getting more skeptical all the time about how much of that you can take care of too. I mean, I used to think that you could take care of quite a bit more than you actually can take care of. I really, but at any rate, we certainly can't take care of the world. And, there is this thing where, the media do this thing where they're telling you the news about every bad thing that happens in a planet that has 6 billion people, which is a lot of possibilities for all sorts of things. And then they thrust a microphone in somebody's face and say, "Well, what's your reaction to that?" And no one answers the right way. The right way is to say, "I don't have any reaction at all to that." But no, even there was, "Oh no, I'm deeply grieved." You have to say the polite thing, but you can't do anything about some bad thing that happened in Borneo. I mean, or even in LA or Chicago. The Buddha is very much, the whole heart of Buddhism is you start with yourself, and you all of the potentiality for good or evil is already within you. So you don't really need to read, how everyone else handles it. You got your own. You're dealing with all the human energies of the whole mix of human energies is all within you that you can either struggle with or work creatively with. So that's your choice.
And that's really how you would have an impact. Anyway.
I think it's interesting. I find the ethics, the early Buddhist ethics, although it's very simple, very basic, and sometimes I used to think, well, why am I even paying attention? I don't really have trouble about whether or not to murder somebody or steal things. It's just not anything that ever comes up. None of these things ever come up particularly, but you can't say that they're not coming up in the world all the time. I mean, people, what is the attitude to being truthful? And what is the attitude towards, respecting life in a very broad sense? I mean, a lot of these are things that quite a few people are quite confused about. So it's important that such things get, taken somewhat seriously, because some people seem to be quite confused about what's wholesome and what's not wholesome. Well, it's obviously grown very quiet as you all consider which sins you want to secretly confess tonight. But frankly, since we're lay people, we don't actually do that. I mean, if you were a monk, we were all monks. Twice a month, we'd be up there. We have many more rules, and if we break any of them, we're going in front of the whole group and saying, "Yes, I was a bad monk. I took a $20 bill for giving this guy a blessing, whatever." And they had different rules for the whole thing, and they had different penalties and so forth. So there was this very much of an emphasis on the people who were up for that sort of thing, which would not have been me, to train rigorously and very stringent moral conduct. And so you have to think, well, what does that kind of training do if you were to undertake that? And it could be very self-revealing in a certain way. You'd be very constricted, to in your activities. In fact, you'd have to pretty much not be too active at all. That's the easiest way to keep ethical precepts. And so, yeah, in some ways, it's not so much that the Buddha is a great moralist in the way that, say, in the Christian tradition, we get that the morals have some ultimate authority on their own or ultimate value on their own. The simple fact for the Buddha was that if you act wholesomely and altruistically and with love and all of that, then you create a peaceful situation for yourself. You have less upheaval in your life. Things calm down. You feel good, and you're in a good mood to meditate and understand the deeper truths. But if your life is like careening from mishap to mishap, your chances of being able to meditate and to seriously do some develop some sense of peace in that way, it's going to be very difficult. So it's just that you got to kind of you can't have a turgid emotional life and practice meditation, because all you do is you're thinking about all the situations you got yourself into and how you get out of them. Now, I mean, if you're already in those situations, then meditation will be helpful because you get a lot of chance to figure out how to get out of them. But really, the only way out of it isn't really through coming up with clever ideas. It's through living wholesomely and virtuously, particularly, trying to do all the kind of these simple virtuous activities make for a happy life. So you just have to see, well, if I'm not happy, then what is it that's causing my unhappiness?
Is there with karma? Is there a coming clean, or we talk about purification practices, but letting it catch up with you in a sense, and kind of eating that there's some kind of, you know what I'm saying, like the rubber band snaps back, or or no?
Well, we do a lot of purification practices, and that's very good too. And of course, the whole Vajrasattva, connecting with, in the Tibetan tradition, we connect with Vajrasattva, and that becomes almost a daily practice for your whole life. And so there's this connection with the holiday of purity. And in a sense, that purity is also part of letting go and being in the present. So, you say the mantra, Om Vajrasattva Hum, and you finish the mantra, and you're clean, clear, and you're in the present moment. So, that idea of purification being a constant kind of letting go, that makes it, that's another way in which you easily become more virtuous without any great effort.
Good answer.
But the best way, of course, is that realizing that the natural state is just pure open Buddha space all the time. And if you rest in that pure open Buddha space, you've transcended all virtue, so that the Dzogchen solution is even easier yet. But we're back on the beginning, so we're going to have to be virtuous for a while. At any rate, we passed our time here, so why don't we dedicate merit? By this merit,
and all the
pain on the missions,
defeat the enemy wrongdoing,
from the stormy waves of birth,
old age, sickness, and death,
from the ocean of
samsara,
and from all beings.
all beings.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Excellent.
Thank you very much.